All right, this video will just help us to understand why it's important to use the international poverty lines. And there's various international poverty lines. The one for the most extreme poverty is now calculated using the more current price levels. I think it's from 2017. Is the $2.15 per day poverty line, and this is considered roughly equivalent to the original $1 poverty line that was originally used. Now, the reason why it's important is because every country has its own national poverty line, and the national poverty lines are not set at the same level of income, and they're not even set at the same level of consumption, right? Because different countries have different standards. So high income countries, the standard of what is considered to be acceptable or the minimum to be in poverty is much higher than it is for very low income countries. And then there's a whole set of countries who are in the middle. And so this can kind of illustrate this. So this shows a distribution of household expenditure or household. Sometimes it uses expenditure, some studies use income. Um, and this gives us a distribution. And so we can start by, and then this is the poverty line drawn here. So this is already adjusted for differences in price levels between the countries. Okay, so we have this poverty line drawn here. And so we can see Ethiopia has a lot of people below that poverty line. It looks like, it doesn't actually say on this, but it looks like maybe 30% roughly are below that poverty line of the international line. So actually the local line used in Ethiopia is actually lower. It's actually at $2.04 equivalent. So if you use the national poverty line, you say, well, only 23% of people in Ethiopia are in extreme poverty. But if you use the international line, it would actually be a higher number according to this, UN definition. Oh yeah, sorry, I got it. 27%. Okay, 27% below. So anyway, so the national line could be a little misleading because you might say, oh, 23%, it's not very good, but I've heard that X country has 20% of people living in poverty, but if they're totally different lines, it's just not comparable in any way. Then Bangladesh, we can see here, is actually, you would say, well, Bangladesh, if you only use the national poverty lines, you would say Bangladesh has a higher level of poverty than Ethiopia, which is absolutely not true. Because the poverty line in Ethiopia, in Bangladesh, is set higher, the national poverty line. When we use the international line of 215 a day, the comparable one, it looks like it's probably about 10 or 15% in Bangladesh versus 27% in Ethiopia. Now, some people might say, well, 50 cents a day is pretty minimal. But one thing we'll find as we look at this topic is there's diminishing returns to getting more income. So it also means the first dollars, the first cents make huge amount of difference. So like going from $1 to $2, $2, $3 to $2 to $3, $4, $3 to $4, sorry about that, makes a really big difference, right? It doesn't make a whole lot of difference if you go from $50 to $51, or you go from $50 to $50.50, 50, but the gains are really big when you have super low income. It might be the difference between not having to miss a meal, or being able to afford some basic cost to get access to clean water, or to put your kid in a local school, or buy a uniform for a local school or something like that. Anyways, so then we go up and we can see Vietnam, it looks like, has almost nobody, or maybe nobody, below the 215 line. This would have looked very different if we went back in time. This is from 2018. But below the national poverty line in Vietnam, which is set at $4 per day, there's 7% of the population. Okay, you can see 7% of the population. It's also going to be, you might find it interesting, and this is a topic we'll come back to later. You can see some of the distributions are very spread out. That means the incomes are very spread out. You have really high and really low within the range. And some are more clustered. Bangladesh, for example, is much more clustered. Ethiopia is also relatively clustered compared to Turkey, for example. Then you could say, oh, Turkey has a higher poverty level than Vietnam if you use the national poverty lines. Okay. But if you compare the distributions, as long as this has been adjusted for purchasing power, then you can clearly see it does not have a higher, it has, according to its national poverty line, yes, but if you use any other poverty line that is universal and an international poverty line, you will see that Vietnam has a higher level of poverty compared to Turkey. And then finally get to the US. You could even say US has higher level of poverty compared to Vietnam. But again, it is not comparable because the U.S. poverty line is set at almost $25 a day. At $24.50 a day is approximately what the U.S. poverty line is, and less than 1% are in the kind of extreme poverty that we would see. Much less than 1%, I would say, the extreme poverty that we see in Ethiopia or Bangladesh. Depending exactly how you measure that. So anyways, so this just gives you an idea. So in this class, we will always use the international poverty lines. We will not use the national poverty lines except for as a point of comparison, just because when you're looking across countries, it just doesn't make sense to use those lines. Okay. So anyways, hope that part is clear.